There we go. Okay, we're going. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to All Things Agriculture Podcast. I'm pleased to have a guest with me today, and my father as well. For those of you who don't know, Dan, my father, Mr. Billy Kornblum, who reached out to me probably 2 months ago, May, sent an email saying how he used to work here back in the 1950s. And I was shocked. My dad knew the name, never met the man, but 65 years later, here he is. So go ahead, Bill. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, so my name is Bill Kornblum, William, actually. Everyone calls me Bill, but back in the day when I worked on the Carey farm here in the 50s, everyone called me Billy because that's what my mom and dad called me. So I haven't been Billy actually for at least 60 years, but it's a pleasure to be referred to as Billy again here. So, how I got to this farm is a wonderful story. I think I ought to tell that. So I was hired by your great-grandfather, Dan Carey. And Dan Carey, at the time that I was hired by him, was running for Congress here in this district, here Tompkins County and the rest of the congressional district here in the Groton, Ithaca area. And he was running for Congress, and he didn't have a chance of winning. It had been a Republican congressional seat forever. It probably still is. Yeah. And the man who was in Congress in his seat at that time was named John Tabor, and he'd been in office for at least 25 years. And your father didn't have a prayer of winning that election. But he had to campaign, and so every Sunday when I started working on the farm, he would take me every Sunday and we'd go campaigning because I came from a political family in New York City. And that's how I got to know, that's how I got here, because your father was very active in a milk co-op. And this milk co-op, the lawyer for that milk co-op was a guy named Dan Morgan. And Dan Morgan was a good friend of my dad, because my dad Dan Morgan was the lawyer for the co-op, and he represented them in the business.
Bill Morgan.
Bill Morgan,
Excuse me.
Bill Morgan. Of course, I got a lot of Dans on my mind. I got 2 generations of Dans. Bill Morgan.
Bill Morgan, yes.
Right, and he was a very prominent lawyer up here.
Oh, dapper Irishman.
And he was a wonderful guy and very good sense of humor. And so my dad knew him because my dad was the commissioner of labor for New York City. And he was involved in all of the different strikes that took place in New York City in the late 40s and 50s. He was served under 3 mayors, my dad did. And so he was the chief mediator of all the labor disputes, major ones, that took place in New York City. And in the 50s, there was a series of milk strikes in New York City that were really severe. And what would happen would be that the Teamster drivers of the milk trucks coming from the dairies, going to make deliveries in the homes, they would go on strike for higher wages, and farmers upstate would have to dump their milk. Yeah. And it was a really major deal. And so when my father had a milk strike on his hands, I wouldn't see him until that strike was settled. And you know, many city people didn't understand it, but when the mothers didn't get their quart of milk for their babies, you had trouble. And when the farmers were dumping milk, you had trouble. So he and Morgan were real close because they had worked together night after night in these negotiations. So I told my mom and dad when I was 14 that I wanted to go work on a dairy farm. And they had a program in my high school called Farm Cadets where you could sign up and they would assign you to a dairy farm to work. And my mom said, "Oh no, you're not going to any old farm. I don't know them. I don't know what they're going to do." You know. So she said to my dad, "Do you know anybody in the farming world up there?" He said, "Sure I do. I'll call Bill Morgan." So he called Bill Morgan, and Bill Morgan said, "Well, I'll call Dan Carey." Wow. He's running for Congress. So I got to work on the Carey dairy farm that way. But I came up when I was 14, and I was saying I was still kind of a little fat kid. So I was a little bit disappointing at first, you know. But your mom and your grandmother, they took real good care of me. I remember your grandmother, when we were harvesting hay, they would put me up on a wagon to unload the bales onto the elevator and put them in the mow. And for me, that was hard work. It was hot and hard work, and I'd start getting dehydrated, and your grandma would come running out with water for me all the time. She was amazing. So yeah, that's how I started. That's how I got to this farm, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I just couldn't get enough of it. And your dad, Jim, he and I worked together every single day that I was up here. And so he gave me the jobs that I was to do. Like I did all the jobs of a little kid who didn't know anything. So back in those days, one of my main jobs in the milking, well, first first thing in the morning I had to go out and get the cows. And they were often way out in the pasture. And so I'd go round up the cows. And the first couple of years I worked here, they had a really good collie dog who would help me chase the cows. That dog got run over, and then they had a dog who wasn't worth anything. And I would have to go get those cows all by myself with the dog, kind of feckless. Anyway, so then I bring the cows into the barn. I get the cows into the barn, and the minute the cows were set up in the barn and all the stanchions were closed, I would turn on the radio, and this would be like 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd turn on the radio, and it was set to the local country western station.
Okay.
And the song would come on, like Hot Canary or some song like that, or some Hank Williams tune. And you look down the barn, and a lot of these cows were starting to squirt. Oh. They were letting dropping their milk.
They got letting down.
Yeah, letting down. And it was just amazing. And so then at first I wasn't handling a milking machine. I don't think I started using I don't think I was allowed to do real milking until the second summer I worked on the farm. So most of the time what I would do would be to empty the machines into pails and walk down the alley, walk down the barn to a milk can that I had set up with a strainer and cheesecloth strainer in it. And I would dump this heavy pail of milk into the strainer, and then it would fill up. And eventually I'd bring the milk can into the cooler, and you had to lift that milk can into a cooler. That was heavy.
Yeah.
And then I would have another can set up so we could, keep doing that. So that was my job most of the time, actually. I did eventually do quite a lot of milking, but I would also then empty the milkers, and so your family, it is raining, isn't it? Look at that.
Oh, yeah, it's coming down.
I need the car key because I'm going to close the
Yeah.
windows.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
So, one of the things that stands out in my mind about your family, and this was coming from your dad, they were really modern farmers in the sense that they watched everything that was going on that was coming out of Cornell.
Yeah.
And elsewhere too.
Yeah.
And they were always on top of it. That didn't mean they were going to adopt it, because they were, like a lot of people, if you adopt things first, you often have problems. So they would wait. That's why, they were talking about getting a milk line, into the milk house instead of that cooler.
Mm-hmm.
All 4 years I was there, but they never did it while I was there. But eventually they did do it. I'm sure.
Did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But what they did do was the county agent and the Cornell people would come around, and they had been the first in the area to do a lot of contour plowing and strip farming. They were very, very early at doing that. That whole big 50-acre field, I think, was one of the first ones in this whole area.
Contour. Set up as contour plant.
Yeah.
Strip cropping.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
Right. And all kinds of things like that. But they didn't like invest quickly in the latest machinery, So I only learned the things that you all do in the July and August, end of June through end of August. So I never learned to plow, for example. I understood it, and they explained it to me, but I never learned. I never actually
You
did
weren't
it.
here because you weren't here for it.
Right.
Yeah.
I could run a side delivery rake and all kinds of things like that. I knew how to run the baler and everything, but only the work that was in those harvesting months. It was funny.
So did Dad have horses at the time? Did you have any
Yes,
horses?
he had a horse. He when I first started working, he had a horse, and that was his last horse because that horse got struck by lightning in a pasture
Really?
on the other side of the road. And another horse that he'd had fallen into a well. There was a well somewhere up there, an old well, and eventually they covered that up because it was a hazard.
Well, I remember as 10 years old, we'd pick rock and put them on a wagon, get rocks off the field, hand pick them, and then we'd take them and fill up these dug wells that Dad knew where they were located
That's
on
right.
the property.
That's
from
right.
an old house
That's right.
location, and we'd fill in that well with rock.
Right.
And I remember doing that several,
Yeah. We picked a lot of rocks.
Yeah. Well,
They're still there.
Apparently my grandfather and dad were sort of on the head of things then if they went to contour planting back there, because that was highly erodible land. That Bathyloid soil
Right.
is highly erodible, so the conservation practice you use is to break that up into strip cropping and hold the soil.
It holds soil better,
Yeah.
right? Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
And that was a big field too. I mean,
yeah,
that
well,
was bad.
it's all grazed now.
I see.
It's all grazed, so
That's
we're holding
amazing.
the soil.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere.
Right. But the big pasture was out back of the barn down the road. And that's still pasture, I would imagine, too.
The
In the gully area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is basically pasture, but it's growing up to the point where we have to keep cattle out of the stream. So we've kept cattle out of the stream, and it's kind of grown up and become real thick with brush.
Wow.
But some of that we've cleared off, and we do graze some of that.
Right. I
Yeah.
see. Right. Yeah, because that was where they went out. And sometimes they went across the road, too. There was another pasture that they used to cross the road.
on this side of Lick
Yeah.
Street. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all ground. I can remember going down and back, getting cows in the pasture and bringing them up at night to milk.
Right.
And that's all been turned into tillable ground.
Ah.
And I remember Dad commenting on some of that when I got out of college and we started kind of expanding the tillable acres. How he commented on it. He said, "I don't think this ground's ever been worked." He said, "I don't ever remember the plow," and it took a couple of years to break
I'll bet.
that sod up.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But it's productive land now.
Yeah,
Wow,
very.
that's
Yeah,
amazing.
become a part of the farm.
So just the thing about the horses, actually, the horse, we used to use the horse for rock picking, actually, because it was, they just tethered the horse to this skid,
Yeah.
and then we'd bring the rocks and pile them on the skid, and the horse would take them to wherever we
Yeah.
were gonna pile them up. But we did that kind of work when we couldn't do other kind of work. I mean, when we couldn't do haying or we couldn't do combining. I would spend the entire month of August on a combine.
Riding on that
Riding-
case combine,
Uh-huh.
tractor pulling that old case combine.
It seemed to me it had a mower head of about 3 inches, but
Took a while.
oh man. I mean, we would go around and around the field, around and around. And me and your dad, he would drive the tractor, and I would sit up on the combine and tie the bags. And put them down, and we'd drop
Slide
it.
them down on that slide.
Slide 'em down on the
I
slide.
did the same thing.
I'll bet.
And then you'd have one hopper here, fill this bag, and then you had another hopper here. You'd flip the lever.
Flip the
and
lever.
be filling this bag up while you're tethering this bag
Exactly.
up and pushing down that slide. Well, I could never move the bags; they were so heavy.
They were so heavy.
So Dad would have to stop the tractor, come back, and we'd slide them down that slide or put them on a truck or something, and we'd keep going. Well,
Right.
he had me on there doing that.
Well, wasn't it the case if you were doing oats, it was okay, but if you were doing wheat or something,
awful
wheat was
heavy.
impossible.
Yeah.
Impossible.
I'd only have half a bag.
Right.
So instead of going into a large bin like they do now, you would
Yeah.
actually load them bag by bag.
Yeah.
And slide.
And you tied a Miller's knot.
Miller's knot.
I've tied thousands of Miller's knots back then, and I don't think I could tie one now because I
You
haven't.
gotta keep this finger.
Wrap it around this pinky.
Yeah, slide it through.
Right.
Yeah.
What was that? So you could just undo it quick? It's just
Yeah,
a pull of
yeah.
a string and it would
Pull the string,
undo.
undo it right away.
Come right off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then what we would do, so they would only usually have maybe, I think about 20 acres of wheat.
Yeah.
would depend on there were allotments back then, and there was some government thing about wheat. And I don't remember, but
There could have been. There were land bank things. You put your
Yeah.
land, if you had too much of a crop, I think they put it in the land bank so you didn't grow anything.
they
that
didn't
year.
want you to grow too much wheat
Yeah.
because the Midwesterners
Yeah.
and the Kansas people, they needed to grow as much wheat as they could.
Yeah.
And here, I mean, the yield on wheat on these fields was amazing. And that's why there was so much of it, you know.
Yeah.
But they didn't. Thankfully, your family didn't grow that much of it because it was hard to handle. That's heavy. But all the oats we would take to Groton. There was a feed mill in Groton,
Mhm.
and we would bring the oats, and we would trade it in for ground up feed with molasses and whatever enrichment in it.
Bring that
And
back.
bring that back.
Yeah.
And that's what we'd feed the cows.
Yep.
Right. And sometimes they actually chopped oats. Sometimes too, they would chop some oats and blow them up in the silo. But when I would first come, maybe it wouldn't be haying quite yet time for haying, so we would do a lot of chopping and silo filling. And one of my jobs was to go up to in the silo and throw down silage in the morning
Mm.
for the cows.
Yeah.
And that was a really hard job. Basically, one of the things I wanted to say is that working here was a life-changing experience for me, those 4 summers. And one of the main things I learned was about work, about what work is and how much work you do, and how much physical work and mental work and how much went into it. And so for the rest of my life, I always knew if I was working hard or not, because I was judging it against what went on here.
We got a baseline.
Yeah.
Establish the
It was
baseline.
a real baseline. I mean, I would come home and I would tell my friends, "You should see what these farmers do. You should see what these farmers do." Like I would say, for example, if it was raining one day, they'd say, "Well, let's go shingle that roof over there. Let's, there's a hired man's house down the road on this side of the road, and there's like a little extension on the back of that house.
Yeah.
That was cinder block walls.
Yep.
Oh, I built those cinder block walls.
Okay.
With-
Was that for a woodshed?
it was originally for an entrance into the house.
Okay.
It's like a mudroom or something like
Yep.
that.
Okay.
And so one day I get up in the morning and finish. Another one of my jobs was washing all of the equipment, the milking equipment,
Yeah.
all the milking machines,
Milking
and
machines
everything
and
else
pails
involved,
and-
the pails, everything. And they impressed on me, like I would think, oh, I want to be driving a tractor. I don't want to be washing dishes and doing this kind of stuff. And they would impress on me how important that job was. And if I slacked off, sometimes, a couple of times it happened that I was slacking off a little bit, not being really clean, careful enough, and they'd get a high bacteria count.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they'd say,
Yep.
Billy, come on. You gotta do this. You
Gotta get every little nook and corner. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
still the
It's
case
still
today.
the case
Yeah.
today. Yep.
Yeah.
Very
And-
important.
And so, so I learned. I learned. This is really important. You have to do this right. And it's like that job alone. After milking, I guess what was it? After milking, we'd have breakfast, and then I'd come out and do that job. And when that job was done, it usually would be around maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. And if it was not great weather, then there was always like, we're going to go mend fences, we're going to do some roofing, we're going to put an extension on the back of this house, we'd do cinder blocks, or there would be, Jim would have to do a lot of sharpening of the mowers. I would help him do that, hold the ends.
Sickle blades.
Sickle
Sickle,
blades,
yeah.
He would do sickle blades, constantly doing that.
Yeah. Keep those sharp.
Keep those things sharp. And in the machine shop, he had a
Yep.
machine shop, and I realized they can do everything. They have to be able to do everything.
Yeah.
Fix all this equipment and build things and bend fences and milk cows and be a veterinarian but so I just was amazed at it, and I couldn't get enough of it. So much so that, like when I got work on a construction job later on, and guys on the job would say to me, "Don't work so hard." What do you know, don't kill yourself. Don't work so hard. But here, as much as work as you wanted to do, they'd give it to you.
Yeah.
But you had a variety every day.
Every
you
day.
look forward to something, maybe doing something different.
Right. Except with the oats.
Eh,
And
That was continuous.
With that case of combine.
Never ended.
Because the family would have, you'd have like 80 acres of oats.
Probably, yeah.
And 80 acres of oats. And that
Head on
combine.
that combine was,
You'd start working on that combine after I finished washing the dishes, the milking equipment. Then we'd start on the combine if it was dry enough, and your dad would go out and he'd know how to judge, whether the grains were
shell
hard
off,
enough and
or
take the shell
shell
off.
Yeah.
And so we'd get up on that combine, we'd stop for lunch, and then a lot of times we would go till 8, 9 o'clock. And sometimes they'd bring dinner out. You'd eat dinner going around the field.
Really?
Yeah.
So who did the milking when you were doing
Yeah.
that?
So a lot of times when that was happening, you'd either have Frank and Ed would be around, or
Okay.
there'd be someone else.
Yeah.
But someone would else maybe relieve your dad from the tractor, so he could do milking.
Okay.
And then I would but I was always on that combine.
Yeah.
So I mean, every single August I spent hours and hours and hours on that machine, and it was rough, but it was rewarding.
yeah.
There was no.
No.
Did you have an umbrella? Or
Yeah, no
anything over it?
canopy, no nothing.
No, it's right out in
I
the
think
sun.
maybe the fourth year I worked on the farm they had put up an umbrella.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep the sun off, yeah.
And there was this the Wisconsin block engine right by where you
Oh,
sat.
that was hot.
And that was
Loud.
hot. And it blew all dust over you.
Yeah, I remember. I rode
You
that.
put
thing
a
a
lot
few
of time
times.
on that, didn't you?
Well, not a lot, but I definitely remember it.
And then
Yeah.
we'd go to these fairs and stuff, and we'd see these big self-propelled combines with a mower head that'd be 8 feet or more, and I'd say, oh, this one was like this big, you'd go
Yeah.
around and around and around.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And then we'd bale up the straw.
Yep.
That was fun.
Small
'Cause it was-
squares.
Yeah, small squares, and they were light bales. That was really fun.
So you had to stack those on the wagon.
Yeah.
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 See that? I don't ever recall doing much of that because Dad had a baler with a thrower or a kicker
Thrower.
on it.
They got that. They were talking about getting that,
Mm-hmm.
but not while I was there.
Yeah.
So we'd load up the hay bales. I did that. Load up the regular hay on wagons, and then come and
Take
bring
them
it
to the barn.
Yeah, take it
Yeah.
to the barn.
Did you ever get those wagons rocking and the load fall off? You had
Yeah.
to stack them a certain way so it tied together and you didn't
Yeah.
lose the load going to the barn.
There was an art to the way they did it. There's some way they
You
stacked
have to
them.
stack them a certain
They were-
way
yeah.
so they stay together. Yeah.
I never learned quite, but I learned enough. So it was,
Yeah.
yeah, that was a major deal. And one thing, I guess in the 54, 55, they were using a baler that would break down a lot, so they would lose a part in the field, and they would have to find this part, and we could spend 2 hours with your
Looking.
dad, me and your dad, looking for this part,
Just tracing your
tracing
steps.
tracks
Yep.
around, trying to find that.
And it probably was brown and blended in with
Yeah.
the ground.
And,
yeah.
and he was amazing because he wouldn't stop until he found it, and eventually you'd find it. But that was hard because it was hot too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember he parked one down in back here when he quit using it. It was an old McCormick baler.
Yeah.
And the flywheel
flywheel.
would come up and come down like
That's right.
Come up.
That's
and
the one I'm
come down
talking about.
And cut the bail.
Cut the bail.
Cut the bail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that was parked down. I never saw it used.
I mean, it looked like it had that big arm
Big
that went
arm,
up and
yeah.
down, packing it in.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. So your dad, I mean your grandfather, lost that congressional election. Listen to me finish that story.
Okay. Yeah.
He lost that congressional election like he knew he would, and he was actually backing Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. for governor, and he took me a couple times to rallies on Sundays when we weren't working in the afternoon, and he would take me to these political rallies, and he introduced me to some of the local politicians. This is Danny Kornblum's son. He's the commissioner of labor in New York City, that kind of thing. Oh, and so one time Frank Roosevelt Jr. was there,
Yeah.
and Roosevelt Jr. had been a law partner of my father and knew my father real well. So your dad brings me into this farmhouse. The rally was on the front porch of the farmhouse. Your dad brings me back in the back room, and there's all these farmers, older farmers, drinking, out of a glass, the jars.
The flasks.
Yeah,
A flask.
flasks.
Oh, flask.
And that, but also out of the. I remember one of them had hooch in a canning jar. Like a.
Amazing.
Oh,
Mason jar.
Mason jar.
jar.
Mason's jar. Yeah.
Like that was homemade. And so
Good stuff.
Franklin Roosevelt Jr. was a real handsome-looking guy, just like his father, except he wasn't. He was not lame. He hadn't had polio, and so your dad brings me up to him. I'm 14 years old. He says, "Frank, this is Billy Kornblum, Dan Kornblum's son." He says, "Oh, Billy, how are you?" And he gives me a big hug. So all these farmers couldn't believe it. Here, this damn Carey's got this real political kid working on his farm, shoveling shit in his farm.
You know how to get boats.
Yeah, right.
Oh man.
It was amazing. And so, these are the things I never, ever forgot. I think about them all the time. So he lost that election. I don't think he got 30% of the vote. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr. didn't get to be the nominee for governor. Averill Harriman became the governor. But he appointed your granddad as Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of New York. And so for the next 3 years, I think, he was the commissioner. And he'd come back to the farm in a chauffeured car. And I was telling our friends, he'd say to me, Billy, he'd say, one of my big responsibilities as commissioner is helping to organize the New York State Fair in Syracuse every year.
Yeah.
He says the hardest thing is to get the entertainment straight. And he said, this year though, I'm really successful. He says, I got Phil Spitalny and the all-girl orchestra to play at the state fair. But he was having a great time as commissioner, but it made all the difference to me because I was not a very good student in those days. I was not a good student at all. So I graduated from high school with a 78 average, which is like a B minus, and I applied to Cornell School of Agriculture. And my college advisor back in New York said, "Oh, you're never going to get in there. Forget about it. You got to apply to some safe schools." I only applied to that school because your granddad told me I didn't have to worry. I got into the school by return mail because he was an ex officio member of the board of trustees. And
well, look how it turned out.
Amazing. It turned out amazing. It was amazing. So. Yeah, so back in those days, you had to pass, to go to Cornell, if you came from the city, you had to pass what was called a farm practice test. Because they didn't want city kids applying to the School of Agriculture where the tuition was much less, and you could be a pre-med or whatever you wanted. I was actually studying animal husbandry when I majored in animal husbandry at Cornell. And I really seriously wanted to be a farmer until I was faced with the actual choice, like put up or shut up. But so it was a wonderful, wonderful educational experience for me, and I would never had it except for your great granddad. Really amazing.
So when you were at Cornell, did you work here at all?
No.
No. Okay.
No. What happened was the next summer, I got a job on a farm in England. Again, through my family connections. Mm-hmm. I wanted to stay working on a farm, but I wanted to travel, and so my dad happened to know somebody who had been working in agricultural policy in England, and one thing led to another, and I got a job in England. But it turned out to be not a happy farm because they were raising these steers to go into a hoof and mouth disease research program. They were going to shoot them up with vaccines. Yeah. And eventually they would get sick because the vaccines weren't working in that time.
Yeah.
And then they would cook them. They'd
burn them.
Yeah. So I was in charge of working with a crew of men, getting the fodder ready for those animals, hay and whatever, But I knew what to do because of having worked on the Carey farm.
Wow.
And then after that, right after I graduated, I went into the American Peace Corps. It was only the second year of it, and I was assigned to go to Africa. And in Africa, I taught physics and chemistry, but I did a lot of extension work kind of thing with local farmers who had problems and issues, and so all ways I was able to use things that I had learned here all my whole life.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're able to, the Careys are able to get their influence into all the way over across the
Totally.
across the ocean.
Yeah.
Then
Oh,
wow.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where in Africa was that?
So I worked in Ivory Coast, which is
Oh, yeah.
just, between like Senegal. It's on the Gulf of Guinea.
Yeah.
Yeah, Abidjan
Okay.
is the capital. I was there for 2 years, and then when I came back, I had so many experiences of a social nature where Africa was newly independent, and I had gotten a lot of insights into African politics and culture, and so I wanted to continue learning more about that. So I went to graduate school in the social sciences. That's what changed me toward the social sciences, because as a result of working here, I had become interested in biology. But they signed me, even though I was trained as a biologist. When I got to Africa, they needed physics teachers, so I taught physics.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was gradually getting away from any idea that I could be a dairy farmer, unfortunately. But hey, you took over.
Yeah. Yeah. Fifth. I'm the fifth generation now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's what it takes.
Yeah. Oh,
I find interesting the connection with Bill Morgan and your dad. That connection. I knew Bill, and my dad respected Bill, and there was a lot of interaction. Bill did a tremendous amount of work for the Wasco Valley Co-op, and he'd go to New York City, and I was a young man back then, but Dad would go to meetings and come home and talk to my mom about, Bill went down to New York City talking to the milk dealers in the city about getting a contract for Wasco Valley Milk Co-op up here in Groton, New York, and the work he did, and that co-op basically dissolved about 15 years ago, and right now we belong to a co-op in Preble, New York.
Preble, yeah.
Preble Milk
we came
Co-op.
through it.
Well, Bill Morgan worked for them too, got
Right.
them established, and did a lot of their work for them.
Is Preble in the Tully Valley?
Yes.
So your dad used to talk to me a lot about that situation back then, because they were building the thruway. They had,
Route 81.
Route 81.
Route,
That's
yep.
what we came down.
Yep.
That's right. And we came straight down the Tully Valley.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So your dad was livid about Route 81.
Oh, I remember him talking about that.
I mean, your granddad.
My grandfather.
And
yes.
your father.
He knew Bill Underwood and some other dairymen up there that by putting that highway up through there was going to split their farm.
Yes.
It was going to split their farm right in two.
And am I
it would make it
right
difficult.
in saying it was some of the best dairy land
Oh,
around?
yes.
It was
Yes.
Yeah,
magnificent
Without a
land.
doubt.
And I have that image in my mind of him talking to me about the Tully Valley and Route 81 and how upset he was about it,
Yeah.
And it was like, to me, it was like John Steinbeck, and that kind of thing. It was really.
Well, my grandfather, I think, he felt as if he didn't have that power to be able to influence those decisions.
Right.
I think he was out of the state office.
Right.
And he felt frustrated that he couldn't have some kind of more of a moving impact on where that was going to be located.
Right.
But
Right.
as it turned out,
Yeah.
probably for the economics and everything to do in New York State, it probably were another location maybe, but it's contributed to the New York State economy
Right.
without a doubt. And
Yeah.
the amount of traffic.
Sure.
But
But Bill, so the one of the things my father admired about the Carey farm, although they never visited me, actually, I didn't want them to visit. I was just here on the farm. That's it. Don't bother me. So, but one of the things that my dad admired about the Carey farm that he heard about from his friend Bill Morgan was that you were in this co-op,
Yeah.
and they believed in these co-ops. So the co-op was a very big deal, as I understood it. And every summer, the co-op had a picnic. And they had a summer picnic, and I think it was in Watkins Glen or somewhere.
Fillmore Glen in
Fillmore
Moravia.
Glen. In Moravia.
Fillmore
Right.
Glen in Moravia.
Fillmore
National
Glen.
State
Right.
Park.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we passed it on the way down. And we'd play softball.
Okay.
And we had a big softball game, and all the farmers would get together and have a big softball game, and it was the most fun. And all the farm families would bring a dish, and they'd have a long table loaded with all kinds of fabulous food. You know, that each family brought something
Yeah.
that they really liked. Do you still do that kind of thing?
Well, Wasco Valley dissolved.
Yeah.
But up until that time, we did try to get together. Not so much the milk dealer that we were selling to was actually putting on an event during the summertime that there were 3 or 4 co-ops that sold to this milk
Right.
dealer in New York City. So they would put on an event for us. At Fillmore Glen would be 3 or 4 other co-ops there besides Wasco Valley, which we belong to.
One summer when I worked, I think it was either the 3rd or the 4th summer. Your dad and granddad, they bought a big chunk of land that added onto the farm. I think it was down that way, down the road that way. So I think it was at least 150 acres, and it was a piece of I guess a piece of a farm that maybe other parts were sold elsewhere to others as well. But it was an occasion for your granddad to talk to me a lot about the competitiveness of the farmers. This is something that's come up in
Yeah.
some of your podcasts.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and he'd say to me, you know, you look out and you see the villages and the farms, and it all looks pretty peaceful and rural, and everyone is taking in their crops. He says, but deep down, he said, they're all in competition with each other, and there's a lot of, you know, kind of feelings about that. So then he took me. This is your granddad. Took me to a major farm auction. I think this was the 4th summer I worked on the 4th summer, and I saw it in person when they were bidding on this big farm, and Cornell was one of the bidders, and everyone was whispering, Cornell's bidding, you know, Cornell, big bad Cornell, they're going to buy it all up. And sure enough, they bought the farm.
Okay.
They bought that farm, and all of the equipment was auctioned off. I watched that happen, and it was very, very instructive to me, because he and Jim too would talk to me. But your dad was not a big talker, as I remember.
No, he wasn't. No,
He was a real
quiet.
silent,
He
kind
was
of
quiet.
quiet and amazingly hard worker, but he didn't talk a lot. Whereas your granddad, he talked to Blue Street,
Yep.
and so did your grandmother too.
Okay. Yeah.
She was very funny. She had a great sense of humor. And anyway, so he would tell me, well, you know, you've got to grow. You got to keep
Moving
modernizing.
ahead.
You got to
gotta
keep moving ahead.
progressing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for many years, I knew that was the way the Careys thought, but I didn't know if the farm still existed. And so when I finally saw it on Google Earth, I said, "Whoa, that's the Carey farm!" And then I looked on the internet and I saw some reference to it. But until you started doing the podcasts and kind of getting more of the communications thing going, I didn't know really how you had managed to grow and move from one generation to another.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's a process that intergenerational transfers is a complicated process with any business, but even more so with a farm. And you've got he's got siblings besides, but he's the main person here,
Sure.
and there's a tremendous investment
Of course.
in this farm, and farm families have a difficult time figuring out how to pass that equity on to the next generation, and not to be fair, but you're not always equitable.
Right.
It's going to be, you got to be fair about it, but you can't always be spread it
Right.
because he can't afford to
No.
pay his siblings.
Yeah,
for
buy them all out.
investment.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
You gotta do
You
what's
know,
best to keep it going.
That leads to the demise of farms.
Mhm.
That families have a problem with that, and farms
Yeah.
eventually go out of business because of
Well,
that.
that's why I was so relieved and joyful to see that the Carey farm was a successful example, where so many, all the years after Cornell, I would read about the decline of family farms. There's so many fewer, they're not making it. And then I come across your work, and I see that whereas we had 50 cows to milk, you've got 300, and you're not doing it on that much more land. So the productivity of dairy farming has kept up with the productivity of industry, basically. It's incredibly more productive. But the costs are there.
Yeah,
too.
the costs always are going up,
Right.
and then your price doesn't follow costs in any commodity.
Right.
So that's the challenge.
And the return on investment it's a business, and you've got to see a return on investment, and that is leading to the smaller dairies not surviving, and why they have to grow larger and larger, and some of that we need a better price, and we're getting a better price today for our milk, but who knows how long that'll last. It's been a cyclical thing, but you look at the milk companies that buy our milk, the DFAs and upstate Niagaras of the world, the bigger dairy co-ops, they've got to see a 20% return on investment, or they're not going to survive.
Wow.
The 15 to 20, that's what they're
That's
looking
a lot.
at, and they want to see that, and in turn, we've got to see it also if we're going to supply them with
Sure.
raw milk.
Sure.
So it's a dynamic that, like you say, we got to be progressive, but and keep growing. But there's dairies in New York State that are exponentially expanding.
In terms of costs, there's also like social costs in terms of the way it has changed your lives. My brother-in-law grew up on a small marginal dairy farm in western Pennsylvania, and he knows that I'm coming to visit you today, and he said, make sure you ask him about the manure. Make sure you ask him about the manure, because I told him you're milking 300 cows where you used to milk 50. And back when you had 50 cows, manure was considered a good thing, not so much of a problem. But I gather now it's like a major deal because you've got all these regulations to cope with, and it's no longer just put it in a manure spreader and do
You
other
can look at
fields.
it as a problem, but you got to look at it as an asset.
Yeah.
And how do you use that asset
Fertilizer.
to get the most value out of that manure? The manure has a value to it.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how you can best utilize that through best management practices. And New York State has been, I think, leading the country in some respects and getting best management practices out on the farm to control manure runoff and to utilize those nutrients to a greater extent.
Right.
And then some other states. Pennsylvania is lagging behind in that. And this Chesapeake Bay cleanup initiative is really pushing Pennsylvania to do more to prevent the
It's all about preventing runoff into the groundwater and the streams.
into the streams.
Yeah.
So you have a pool? Do you have a containment facility or something like that?
Yeah, we built one last about almost a year ago. We built a large pit, about 2.5 million gallons,
Whoa.
and that'll hold. It could hold a year's worth if we had to, but we don't. You fill it all. Basically, it makes so you don't have to spread in the winter time.
Right.
So you aren't out there when the ground is covered in snow. You have the freezing, thawing. You have the frost where the manure might not get absorbed in the ground, and so you store it all winter. And then we have a custom guy come in who doesn't live too far from here, and they can pump. What was it? It was 1.5 million gallons in that from November. We started filling it until about April, and custom operator was able to come in and pump that out in about a day and a half, and have it completely gone. And he has a machine where they pump it out into 8-inch hoses over the ground, and they run these hoses along our fields, and it goes to a machine that has basically knives, and it just cuts a furrow into the ground, and it places that manure under the soil.
Wow.
So you don't have the smell, you don't lose the manure, the nitrogen, and it sits in the ground, and it's you capture that nutrient.
Right.
And they can do that. Like I said, 1.5 million gallons in about a day and a half.
Yeah.
So,
And-
wow. And is that part of the no-till process also?
So, wow, that's
That's a component.
yeah,
We capture the nitrogen,
Right.
and then, but where we plant the corn is where we've utilized the strip till
Yeah.
technology that we try to adapt.
Right. I've been reading about it. I mean, you had a whole program about that.
Yeah. I have friends who've done, and Dad's done a lot of research into it. We started implementing that about 5-6 years ago here.
Right.
Yeah.
We're able to, instead of plowing the entire whole field over, exposing all the ground, you go through with a shank and a 6-row shank, and it just creates a 12-inch deep divot, and then you just run the planter right through that. You only plant in that exposed area,
Right.
and you leave the cover
Right.
so it doesn't wash. It doesn't. We don't have the erosion of our fields anymore.
You're right. See, when I was at Cornell, I took a course, for example, in agronomy. I learned a lot about the problems of the moldboard plow and turning it over and soil structure. So you keep the soil structure, but you're able to get growth out of it. I
If
mean,
it works out well, if you take a field that's sod, that's been in sod for 4 years, and then you strip till it and you plant corn into it for 4 years, and then maybe you have to disc it after 4 years of corn to put seed down. There's almost 8 years of the ground. You haven't turned that ground over. It's the same, more or less the structure has been
Right.
kept constant for almost 8 years.
So you can plant corn 4 years in a row?
Yeah, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
We do.
Wow.
We always
if
have.
Oh.
Well, there's always been like a 4-year corn and then a 5 or 6 year hay rotation.
Right.
And it,
That's
I
what
didn't-
that's why we've utilized it. See, sort of the way we got into this strip till business is cover cropping.
Yes.
There's been a big push in New York State and throughout the country to plant a cover crop, a rye, some combination of a rye, to hold the soil during the wintertime, have a growing environment there year round on that soil to keep those microbes active and growing. And then, so I was reading about that and realized there were some people who were harvesting that winter cover crop in the spring, using it for cow feed. So I said to Eric, he came home from Cornell, and I said, well, why don't we try this and use some triticale and rye, and triticale is a little better protein than rye, and we'll plant that, and we'll go in and harvest it, round bale it, and wrap the bales. So that's a fermentation process that takes place there. And then we'll go in with a strip till machine, cut a slot in the field, and plant into that. Well, the first year we did that, we rented a machine from a neighbor, and it was sitting in his hedgerow, and we got it home, and well, we got it going, but the thing, it wasn't used to New York State rocks. So we used it 1 year. We took it back and we started looking for a more substantial machine, and we came across one, and we bought it, and we brought that home and fitted it up, and we've been using that ever since. It can take the hard pan, or take the rocks that
Yes.
exist in the soil out here.
That's amazing.
but it speeds up the process. I mean, basically, you one pass and you plant right behind it. You don't burn near the diesel.
Yeah.
You don't have the compaction from driving over the same field over. Instead of
Sure.
mowboard,
Right.
disc once at least, and then plant. It's just strip till, and you could plant later in the day as long as the conditions are correct.
Now, I remember we used to plant clover as a cover crop, but then we'd plow it under.
Oh, you
sometimes.
did?
Here,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, okay. That was
Huh.
a crack. Yeah,
That
that's
was a-
way back.
yeah.
And clover is a good if you can get that clover planted early enough in the fall to do that, that's a real good nitrogen source
Exactly.
the next spring. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
There's a lot of that taking place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But that, the Carey family was always really up on what was going on, and I knew that that the chances were very good that if you could get the succession of generations, it would still be here,
Yeah.
because you were always very modern in your thinking,
Yeah.
whereas my brother-in-law's farm, they never had more than, say, 20 cows.
Yeah.
So it was always a very marginal farm with no hope of making it into the future. But all the time I was here, you were adding and doing things like
Yeah.
that, and doing new practices.
Yeah.
Billy said that they were discussing putting a milking parlor on back when you were here,
Oh yeah.
back in the 50s.
They were
Okay.
talking the pros and cons of everything. That would be the subject of the dinner conversations always.
We still kind of do that sometimes, don't we?
Right.
We
still,
brainstorm, that's
yeah,
right.
we do a
We
lot
gotta
of
brainstorm.
crazy ideas and talk about it, and lots of times they probably 90% of the time they never have them, but sometimes they do, or they come to fruition later on.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
got to have those ideas, be willing to try them,
Right.
and maybe screw up or
And
fail.
we
but-
bring in consultants from time to time, and try
Oh,
to
yeah.
draw out a plan going forward, and utilize what we can. And Ann and I, talking about generation transfer, Ann and I went to a Cornell series of meetings to set up something that we could move forward with Eric, bring him into the business. And
Early
they had
on.
training down there.
Yeah, early on too.
Early on.
Yeah, which is
Well, I after my heart problems with my heart and all that, and I realized, I could be gone tomorrow and they'd be in a hurting situation, and so I want to leave this farm so that the next generation has a shot.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's been my outlook. Yeah.
I would think so. It's
Yeah.
a wonderful farm, and
So you ate your lunches and dinners here in this house.
that's right.
That's
That's right.
I was probably sitting over
4
here.
summers. Yeah, you sat in the high chair right over there.
Okay.
At least the first year.
like you said,
I thought my early hear that.
that same high chair was always full when you were here. Then
it was
every
always
summer
full.
there was another one in it, right?
That's why I don't remember that there were these other kids, because he was in the high chair first, so there was always a kid in the high chair.
Yeah. No, my
I'm
mom.
gonna do chores pretty soon.
Yeah,
You're
relatively
okay.
soon. Yeah. No, we're so all right. So, you have to get into your hotel at some point.
We're good.
Okay. Yeah. No, we're fine. So.
I remember, I don't know if you were here at the time. I remember sitting here for lunch one day, and I don't if it was you or maybe Dan Fitzpatrick or one of my uncles come running in the house and said somebody went off, or Billy Kornblum went off the road down here with a tractor. Was that you in the gully?
No.
Somebody down in that gully, somebody went off, and I remember everybody ran out of here. Somebody went.
Actually, no, that was not me. So when I get up here, I'm 14 years old, and not your dad, but one of your uncles says to me, "Can you drive the truck?" Can I drive the truck? I couldn't drive anything. First, they showed me how to drive a tractor.
Yeah.
I had been on a farm visiting, and I knew a little bit about the clutch and so on. So they showed me how to drive a tractor. So if you can drive a tractor, you can drive the truck. So it was a stick shift truck.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this as long as I live. So they showed me how to drive the truck, and the truck was up here, and we had to take some bales down there or something like that. So take them over there. Get in the truck and take it over there. So I get in the truck, I go up, and then I'm coming up the hill on the other side, and I wasn't in the right gear, and the truck stalls on the hill. So I'm squeezing that brake for all I'm worth. I got the emergency brake up, and I'm on the side of the hill. I mean, you've had this experience, I'm sure. So then I get that clutch out, But
Yeah.
finally I did it.
Okay.
Finally I did it, and it was like the greatest feeling on earth. So I never ran a tractor off the road that I remember. But one thing that happened was we would back a load of hay into this barn here.
Yeah.
With a heavy, like a
Push pole.
push pole,
Yep.
pole.
Yep.
And so you push that hay back, that wagon up into the barn, and you had to go in reverse,
Yep.
and you had to go smoothly and do it
Well, somebody steered the wagon
Yes.
with a wagon tongue.
with the tongue on the other side.
Tongue on the other end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I was moving it up, doing real well, and something had happened when they set the pin on the push pole, and it busted or something like that, and the whole wagon came down on the tractor.
Oh.
The whole wagon came down on the tractor, back.
Right up the back of you.
But fortunately, none of the hay came down on me. It held.
Yeah.
It made a big slam. Everyone came running out of the house. That could have been that incident. I don't
Okay,
know.
maybe that was
But that wasn't my fault, at least.
Didn't
I felt okay
yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
But it impressed on me, and other experience as well, how dangerous the work you do is, and how accidents happen, and that's another big thing about farming too.
Yeah. It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be cognizant of that when you're doing the work, and you have to. And sometimes, you know, we're doing it every day.
You get so
around
used to
cattle.
it, yeah.
You have to, sometimes
you
you have
forget
to
about
remind
it.
yourself, you know.
There
we're
was a
working on cattle.
neighbor who got hit by lightning. He was riding his tractor in a thunderstorm, and he got hit by lightning. This was back years ago.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I'd hear about all these things. It was
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, no, it's
Now, did you have cows in this barn out here?
We had pens there, and,
Okay.
and they would have some calves, or I think maybe some heifers, but they also would get pigs every year.
Yep.
Do you
Yep.
remember that?
Yeah, I remember the pigs. Yeah. And there was a little building down here where we had pigs. I remember when I was growing up, we had a little building that had pigs in it down here.
Your uncles and your uncles did everything to me that a city kid would experience. So, for example, with the pigs, they'd say to me, "We got to take a pig to get butchered. Billy, get in there and grab a pig."
They greased it up beforehand, huh?
And they would laugh, because you can't grab a pig.
no.
It's very hard to grab a pig. These were smaller pigs, you know, and there were maybe 5 or 6 of them. So you'd grab one, and the other one would be hitting you and running around. It was very hard to get a pig, and you'd be rolling in the slop with the pig. It was hilarious. Another thing about the farm back then in the 50s was that while your granddad and your dad and all the Careys were really up on all the modern stuff, they didn't always have it done. You know what I mean? So, for example, like I was telling you, people were getting barn cleaners, and they never got a barn cleaner the 4 years that I was there, but they were already talking about it.
Yeah.
People were getting milk lines instead of the filter and the cans and stuff.
Carrying the pails.
They were doing bulk milk. But your family, they weren't that quick to get it right away. They wanted to wait until they had
Make
other
sure
things.
it worked.
Yeah,
Make sure that technology
exactly.
worked. Yeah.
So a lot of farmers were cementing the apron outside the barn where the cows would stand on the way waiting to get into the barn in the barnyard.
Paving the barnyard.
They would pave the barnyard.
Yeah.
So the big barn down here, when the cows came in from the pasture and stood by the door waiting to get in, they didn't have paving. They had mud.
Yeah.
And the mud would get filled with manure. So at one point, someone had decided to dump a load of stones in that mud outside the door. And some of them were big boulders. You know, they weren't sharp, but they were round.
Yeah.
So the cows started to slip on those boulders, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
started to get infected hooves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, and that was real bad because you could lose a
Yeah.
cow that
Oh,
way.
sure. Yeah.
And so the second summer I was working on the farm here, they lost a couple of cows that way, and the vet said, "Oh, you got to deal with that area outside the barn door."
Yeah.
So they sent Billy to pick those rocks
Oh.
out of that.
Oh, the slop. It probably was nice and deep.
And it was half mud and half manure.
Yeah.
And your dad would say to me, "Don't you want to wear gloves?" And you know, I was so in love with milk and manure and hay and all that I didn't care. I'd stand there and put my hands in there and pick out those rocks for 2 hours at a time. That's why they thought of me as kind of heroic kid.
Oh
And
man.
eventually, then they cemented it, but not while I was there. You
Yeah.
know.
Well,
So,
yeah.
you know, and well, they did after the outbreak of the the infected hooves. But you know, I learned a lot about farming. I'll tell you, I really learned a lot about what it takes to be successful. And they were successful. Even
So
then.
after Peace Corps, now.
So after the Peace Corps, partly, you know, I think it was partly as a result of working here. I became very interested in going to graduate school to learn more about social issues like economics and sociology. So I got a doctorate in sociology at the University of Chicago, and I became a specialist in what's called community studies, and a lot of it derives from my experience here, where you write about a community. And I wrote about, my first book was about steel mills in Chicago, the communities around the steel mills in Chicago. But it was my experience getting to know Groton and Cortland a little bit and Ithaca, that got me really interested in these smaller towns and communities. So, I became more and more involved in that kind of research. And I never really went back to rural things, but I always followed it. I've always been fascinated by, having learned so much about it as a kid.
So did you publish a few books?
Yeah.
But okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've written a bunch of books.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Have to check that out.
Right. Yeah, I spent my life as a professor,
Yeah.
and so you had to write something.
From picking rocks out of shitty mud to being a professor, quite the change. But you gotta.
It taught me life lessons that
Yeah.
were totally invaluable,
Yeah.
completely invaluable. Like I began by saying, what work is. I know what work is, and I know when you have to do certain kinds of work, and you have to get it done. You have to figure it out.
When you go back to the city after every summer, and your friends probably you lost a few pounds, and probably a little stronger, and how'd they react to being
made
in
a
an
huge
upstate
difference.
farm?
Well, that was the biggest transformation in my body, because from 14 to 17 I matured, and by the time I was 17 I was a big, strong kid.
Yeah.
And I remember, for example, when we would go out mending fences, when I was 14, I wouldn't do very much. I could help feed the wire, whatever.
Yeah.
But by the time I was 17, they'd let me pound in those stakes,
Yeah.
with the mallet. And I felt great about that.
That'll
And
put shoulders on you.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I played football in high school, and it was all due to the work, to having worked, physically on the farm. The amount of hay that we put in those barns was also incredible. Those bales, and sometimes they were wire bales, sometimes they were string bales. It was all, and the wire bales were much heavier.
Steel wire. Yeah.
Yeah.
I never use those. We use all the sisal twine, but
Yeah, sisal twine.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's here.
That's what they preferred.
Yeah.
Your family mostly used the sisal twine.
Okay. Not much steel.
No.
No.
I think that one summer they had a lot of extra work needed to be done, and they rented a baler with somebody who did some of the wire bales. Yeah. But we did a lot of filling silos too earlier in the summer. Chopping.
Uprights.
Yeah.
Probably that old
Tile
silo that you
So
took
that
down.
tile silo is no longer there.
No, you
No.
took it down.
Yeah, we took that down, and we weren't using it. It was really obsolete.
It's funny because when it was built, it was state of the art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
Your family was really proud of that tile silo,
yeah.
and I would go up there every morning and
Throw that feed out.
Yeah, that was hard work.
Yeah. No, I did that a few times.
I'll bet.
That's hard work. Yeah.
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 You'd get a pile of this silage, and it was fermented, so it smelled quite strong. And a huge pile of it, and then we would put it in like a big bushel basket and bring it down to the cows, dump
Carry
it in
it
front of
around.
the cows.
No,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it was a lot of hard labor.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of talking about today, a lot of that work ethic, in a lot of ways, doesn't exist. And young people today, growing up, when Eric and our kids were in school, we still had the square bales and putting them in the barn, and we utilized a lot of their friends during the summer. We'd get them to come up, and we'd bale a lot of hay. We'd put in 20 loads a day on a
Wow.
good day.
Yeah,
The
a
big
lot.
kicker wagons, you'd have 100 bales on a wagon, and have a bunch of fellas in the mow, and Ann would go get pizza and ice cream, and they'd come out of the mow
and hop in the pond and
yeah, jump in the
Right.
pond,
it
go
was
swimming.
good
and-
fun.
Yeah.
But those boys learned, they knew what hard work was, and all those followed some of those boys, and one right now is superintendent for the Groton Highway Department.
Really?
And they matured, and he'll still tell you that he enjoyed working here. It was hard work, and that's something that we don't employ those kids anymore. I went to a round baler. It's all mechanical basically now. One guy operator bales of hay and the big round bales, and then we got a machine that goes around and pick those up and bring them back, and Eric wraps them back here, runs a wrapper, and so it's all mechanical.
Oh, you wrap them after the right.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's a lot of young people today don't have that experience.
No. Do you do second cutting? Are you going to get a second cutting?
Oh yeah, we already have that done.
It's done already.
Oh yeah,
Whoa.
we do first cutting in the end of May by Memorial
Really?
Day. Yeah.
Wow.
Hopefully the corn's done by early June.
How much
and
corn do you have now?
We did 250 acres this year.
250 acres. Wow.
How much would you do? 50 acres back? 40, 50 acres?
I think there was about 80 acres of oats and about 40, 50 acres of corn.
And probably was a lot of that just picked. Probably wasn't chopped.
Some of it was chopped and some of it was got hard.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was less than the amount they chopped usually,
Yeah.
I think.
And the rest was all just grass. Sickle
Yeah.
bar and baled it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. How many acres of hay are you doing now?
Pretty close to, with pasture, you're talking between 2 and 250 acres. We're probably 550 tillable that we
Are
run.
you able to feed your herd with your own?
Yeah.
With your own fodder?
Basically, yeah.
Well, we do purchase corn meal.
Yeah.
Oh,
Ground up
yeah.
corn meal. We
Grain.
Well,
purchase
you
that.
did that then too, because we take the oats down to Groton and get it.
No,
ground.
we don't. We don't have enough. We don't grow enough corn.
Oh.
All the corn we have, we chop and goes as silage.
Right.
And so we end up buying our grain corn
Yeah.
back out from a mill.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and the protein supplement that we use, we buy that too.
Sure. Wow. Are you affected by these different milks now that these urban people are drinking? All almond milk,
The fake milk.
fake milk, fake milk.
Yeah, that's it definitely is it's a competitor, and I don't know how much it is really bumping up against milk sales. It's a competitor for sure, and it's tough to push back. I just call it fake milk because you look at the ingredients on the back and it's about a list this long
Right.
compared to milk on the back of a milk container. But it's not, it's kind of like the fake meat. It's the same sort of struggle. And a lot of times people think milk or meat is bad, people who aren't from farms, and I kind of explain the process and how efficient cows are today. Like the number I like to tell people is back when you were here back in the 50s, there were 36 million dairy cattle in the United States, and each cow produced roughly 5,000 pounds of milk a year. Today, there's just over 9 million dairy cattle, and they produce 23,000 pounds of milk a year. So we have a fourth of the volume, but we produce 5 times the production.
Wow.
And so it's like if cows are bad for the environment. Well, we only have a quarter of the cows we used to have, so I don't know what they were doing 50 years ago. It must have been a lot worse than it is today. Because 4 times the manure, 4 times the water you needed, 4 times the feed, and you weren't getting as much product. So I tell people that, and usually that sometimes will make them think, or all the food byproduct that goes to cows and cattle, billions and billions and billions of pounds of beet pulp, orange peel, candy, all this basically waste from our food system gets fed to cattle.
Yeah.
And it would just rot if we didn't. It'd go to a landfill, it'd get incinerated.
Unfortunately, it ends up that way. We're throwing away too much food
Yeah.
in this country.
Say we throw away almost 40% of what we...
Throwing away too much food in this country, and we need to utilize that for human nutrition, not feed our cattle with.
Yeah.
But milk, the fake milks, my mind, the dairy industry hasn't taken enough of a proactive approach to
True.
counter that. And there's some initiatives going on now they said we got to take the high road on that. We have to, milk protein is the most comprehensive protein you can buy
Right.
today. And people have got to come to that conclusion.
Right. Well, that's a fascinating subject for us to get into for a minute, because I guess one of the things I represent here in this conversation is the connection between the farm country and the city country. Since I'm a city kid who always dreamed of the farm and still have it with me, the problem of this gulf of knowledge and between the city and the country has always existed in the United States and elsewhere, but it affects a lot. I mean, it affects how we think about things like milk, for example, real milk versus fake milk. I mean, one of the things you might want to do from time to time in your podcast is talk to me or people like me about, you know, what we don't understand about our food that we really need to understand. We love all milk products, the cheeses, the soft cheeses and
Yogurt,
and yogurt,
ice cream,
all that
icing.
ice cream. Oh, ice cream. Well, you can't go to Cornell without really getting hooked on ice cream.
No, that's very true. The dairy bar.
So there's so much misinformation about food and how we deal with it that your podcast is fantastic in the sense that it's really about modern dairy farming. But from time to time, you might want to think about the non-farmer and like me.
Yeah.
I
No.
think it's useful.
No, that's kind of what the goal of this was, have people and I've had people email me who've just out of the blue, not much, but because I have my own personal email, but then I do an email that I think you contact me through for just a podcast, and I'll get a random email from someone, oh, wow, I didn't know anything, or people comment from somewhere in Europe, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I didn't know any of this, about farming before. This is really cool, thanks. And you never know who you're going to
Exactly.
watch.
And a modern guy like you who, is much more cosmopolitan, for example, than your grandfather was, who, he basically lived his life on the farm, right? And when I worked here, we would go to Groton at most once a week. And that would be often in August when we were bringing oats to get ground up and to feed.
Yeah.
And so I would get a candy bar maybe once a week at most, and otherwise it was right here on the farm. It was kind of isolated in a certain way, culturally,
Yeah.
and that's much less the case now, especially with
Yeah.
guys like you.
Yeah.
So facing that boundary between the rural and the urban, which is so kind of difficult in our country, is an important aspect of, I think, what your generation of farmers represents. It needs to do more.
Yeah, I've always told people my generation is almost the first generation of farmers that has to try to tell people that the food we make for them is good for them.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it. I don't
Right.
think you ever, growing up my age, you never worried about that. Grandpa, when you were back, this is the first generation where you have to proactively try to tell people, no, we have a very, the food's safe here. It's good. Eat it. It's not,
The milk is the safest product you can. That milk can't leave that farm
unless
if it's got to be antibiotic free, bacteria free. It's got to be.
yeah,
and if it
the
isn't,
standards are
the
unreal.
standards
It's amazing, I know.
The standards are so strict on
Right.
milk, and then it goes from here. It goes right to pasteurization within 48 hours of pasteurized and made into
Right.
a manufacturer fluid product. But it's so safe, and the beef industry, to a large extent, is. But we're importing more and more beef, it seems, and some of that isn't of very good quality. The way they're labeling, and I don't quite understand it.
Right.
Country of origin labeling is being utilized by other countries, and they're saying it's made in the United States when it really isn't. And there's a lot of false advertising in that
Sure.
respect going on. And a lot of the issues with the milk, with the BST.
Oh, yeah, that was a big
somatotrophin,
thing.
Right.
And you see the advertising with milk is antibiotic free.
Oh, I hope so.
I wouldn't leave the farm if it wasn't. And
It gets-
Because those are detectable. Right?
Oh, yeah. Every single load gets sampled.
Yeah, every single load, and people see that this advertising.
It's
I
it's
guess if you're in
advertising.
that business, you got to advertise, but it's kind of false advertising. And from our perspective, dairy industry needs to be more proactive in
Yes.
getting the word out.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting that way because there's
We
a
are.
lot more younger people doing stuff like this, trying to get outreach.
What's remarkable in your podcast, how you're talking to a lot of young farmers just like yourself.
Yeah, just from being at Cornell, I have such a network. I was in the ag fraternity down there, and that's a lot of, I know guys all over the country who, I'll say, hey, you want to come on? I'll do it over video. I could do it, over Zoom or something. oh no, I'll come out sometime. I want to do it in person. So it's, it's kind of cool. You get guys in the Northeast, guys out west. It's agriculture is big and vast and wide, and that's another thing people don't realize how agriculture is from logging to honey to maple syrup to cows. It's not just dairy, even though this is a very dairy centric area. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. Wow.
But,
well, it's very heartwarming.
yeah.
I mean, to be here.
Well, it's an experience for us.
Well, that's
I mean, I'm enjoying
it's like
it
a Rip
so
Van
much.
Winkle experience. It really is. It really is.
but,
I'm glad you reached out to my son.
I'm
sorry
yeah.
we have this
I'm
experience.
glad you're able to send that email, and I'm more than happy to accommodate you. So
Well, that's great. So maybe, do you have other questions, or do you do things that we still want to talk about?
you answered a lot,
Good.
honestly. So you answered most of my questions. I don't know if anyone, Dad or anyone.
Well, I have not a question, but just how we relate to rural and urban. That to me is a dynamic going forward that we've got to address. And how do you have any perceptions on how you would tackle that kind of an issue?
I don't know, but I think some of these podcasts are offering an approach. I was thinking the other day, I don't think I've ever seen maybe it exists, maybe for Midwestern farming, but I've never seen a real-time program about dairy farming on television, where you get to know a farm family and what they do and the work they do and
Okay.
that kind of stuff. If I was a television producer, I would want to have something like that became successful because more and more, I mean, you're able to use all these new technologies which your grandfather never knew about, and so you're able to cut through a lot of the ignorance, but it takes a lot of cutting through because there's a lot of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that, just as an example, this has been a Republican part of New York State forever. It probably still is,
For the most part.
for the most part. Maybe it's less than it was.
Well, Tompkins is more of gone Democratic, but
Back then, Groton had a typewriter factory,
yes.
Smith
SCL.
Corona,
Yes.
right? And a lot of women worked there, I think, and a lot of farm folk worked there.
Yeah.
So there was a kind of a blue collar mentality.
Oh, it was
So
a
you got
big employer.
Yeah.
Big employer.
And so you got some Democratic votes. Your granddad got some votes out of that kind of thing. But then those factories closed down, and in some ways, farm country became more conservative in a sense, a little bit less diverse economically. And now it's changing again, but a lot of parts of the country is still very, very conservative. But modern farmers like yourselves are thinking about scientific issues, and like you're not completely against regulation. You don't want to go polluting and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but you also
no.
don't want to be put out of business by people in the cities who think that your cows don't breed the right stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be more understanding, and that's hard. But I think you're showing the way. In part,
Trying.
So we need more of you.
Yeah.
We've hosted open houses on our farm
I'll bet.
several
Yeah.
times. They call them Farm City Day, where it's
Ah,
advertised
cool.
and people can come with their families, and the big hit is Dan's calf barn. Where the kids are they just love to see the small calves,
Right.
but at the same time we pull out some big equipment and people can see what investment we have in equipment and watch the cows being milked and.
That's fantastic. Maybe what we should do is some city farm days, where farmers come to the city.
Well, John Brown School in New York City. Are you familiar? They have an They are the largest FFA chapter in New York State, as I understand.
That's the high school in Queens, near Queens College, I believe. Yeah.
They have a huge agricultural program.
No
They're
kidding.
largest FFA
Yes.
in New York State, and
Right. FFA is Future Farmers of America.
Mm-hmm.
and
No
we just
kidding.
got it back in the Groton school down here. We're building the program back up.
Oh, wonderful.
But I had two nieces that went to FFA camp in Oswegatchie every summer. They have FFA camp in Oswegatchie up in northern New York, in the Adirondacks, I believe. I've never been there, but I had two nieces that went there. They gave up their cell phone and TV, I believe, and they had just Ann commented yesterday that she was talking. They had the greatest time.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Just the best time of their life, and there's a well-known, I won't mention his name, well-known professor at Cornell, who I know, and he commented to me one time that FFA changed his life.
Wow.
There's a profound influence on him. FFA, and he supports FFA.
That's true of my brother-in-law, Harry, yeah.
But he said it was such a profound, that was several years ago, back in the 70s, or late 70s, and he had such a profound influence on his life. He said the FFA experience.
Yeah, that's my
and
brother.
I think more kids were trying to get it back into Groton. And right now there's a bill in the assembly in Albany that they want to try and get agricultural programs in all New York State schools.
That would
Some
be
kind of
great.
agricultural program.
Well, that's the modern look, farm to table, all that kind of stuff. You know, people are
Exactly.
trying to,
Yeah.
trying to erase those boundaries.
Yeah. Hopefully try to help bring the two, like you said, help fill the void between get kids learning it in school, have a better idea of where food comes from.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's-
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
good for everyone.
Right. And also the climate issues. I mean, you know, you're worried about. You must be worried about oats you got. They're getting dried. I don't know. You
Yeah.
haven't had rain here. Well, we just had a little
A
bit.
little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
The weather last year was wet. This year is dry. It all kind of seems to make itself even out over time. So,
Right.
but yeah, it's there's a lot of challenges. I think, but the biggest one is just the society perception. I think that's number one for sure.
Right.
So
One summer, second summer I worked here, they had an invasion up. This part of this New York State had an invasion of army ants that came through.
Army worms.
army worms.
Army worms.
Yeah.
Army worms.
Yep.
And I never saw anything like that. As a city kid, I couldn't believe it. You know, that was the kind of thing you read about in novels. And these worms would come across a field. They would come across a field of oats, and it would look like a disaster area afterwards. And they would march across the road to the next field. And so they brought in airplanes to spray them.
Yep.
They came down right on the farm and sprayed. And then coming down.
Back before, yeah. Imagine doing that today.
Imagine, right?
Uh,
Imagine. Anyway, I think we got to get over.
Yeah, it's probably getting about time, but
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, we'll show you around the farm after
Yes,
this, and
great.
or if you gotta go to your hotel, we can
No,
we'll
we
do
can-
something.
we have time.
Okay, sure. So anyway, I guess we'll end this here now, and yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and
Thank you for hosting, Eric. And
yeah,
Thank you, Eric.
yeah, thanks for stopping out, everyone for coming. So anyway, yeah, see you in the next episode.
Okay.